Hello and welcome to the Strode Politics and Economics podcast. Today we will be debating taxation and welfare in the UK. I'm Khai and we have Abi as well.
Hello.
So first of all, I think our discussion point is going to be with taxation in the UK. Obviously, we have very different views on economics, me being more laissez-faire, free market, and Abi being more of a socialist, welfare state kind of economist. So I think our first argument is going to be on should taxes go up or go down to, and what it should pay for, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I'll go first. And so my first thought is that taxes in the UK, or taxes in general, are far too high. Personally, I really dislike the idea of taxes, and I'm not a taxation is theft kind of person, but I do like lower taxes. Lower taxes is one of the key uses of government fiscal monetary policy to lower poverty, because poverty it's far better to lower poverty by lowering taxes on working, especially the working class, than to introduce a welfare state, as the inflation that welfare causes is far more negative than the the lowering taxes, because when you lower taxes, you're creating not only production, but through that production you're creating demand. So it's not inflationary demand, it's real demand. So I do think lowering taxes on people, which is going to be our first talking point, will be far more positive for the UK economy and any economy, really.
So I am not for raising the taxes on the working or middle class, really. I want raising taxes on the 1%, because they're the richest, therefore they should pay the most. It just makes sense, right? So I'm for progressive taxation. And here's the point, I do not think that the Conservative government raising taxes at the moment, like the national insurance tax hike, that's wrong. It is wrong, because it's going to massively reduce the disposable income of regular people. And, Boris can talk all he wants about how we're the fastest growing economy in the G7, but we also have had the biggest drop in disposable income among average consumers than we've had in decades, which is actually having more of an effect on the economy than this supposed growth that we're seeing in scare quotes, because the economy is falling apart. Hooray! But yeah, I'm for progressive taxation. I think that tax the rich. I'm a Robin Hood kind of gal. Take from the rich and give to the poor, because it's fairer.
Well, yeah, I've got obviously that's where we differ a lot, but I've got to largely disagree with that. You've got to look at the Netherlands, who has the highest rate of progressive taxation in the world, and is the most unequal nation in Europe in terms of percentage of wealth held by the rich compared to the poor. One of them, at least. It's incredibly unequal. It just progressive taxation doesn't really work. It does work for government revenue. You're just asking the wealthy to leave, essentially, because there's plenty of places where they can pay lower taxes. And what is it? Is it 40 or 50% tax on income already over the maximum threshold? I can't remember what the maximum threshold is. It's either 40 or 50%, which is a huge portion of taxes. So what percent? Let's take someone who's earning, £500,000 yearly in income. So that's really not what they're making. In that rate, they're going to be making around 300,000, which is,
still a lot of
it's
money.
still a lot of money. But you got to think that's 3/5. No, that's 2/5 gone. That's 40%. of your income is basically already gone.
I mean, I would be willing to pay that. If it meant having, efficient, efficient NHS and brilliant schools, I would be willing to pay that money. And also, you talk about the Netherlands. The Nordic countries are well known for their progressive taxation, and Finland is apparently the happiest country on earth, and that's a Nordic country. So, I mean, maybe it doesn't work in the Netherlands, but it does work in other places. Perhaps it can't work in the UK because of the history of, perceptions of socialism. I'd say is probably a reason because, it's been demonized a lot over the 20th century due to, the Soviet Union, because they were quite soundly not cool.
That is one way of putting it.
Yeah. But I mean, there has to be a way to do it. And also, I think it's important to explain how taxes work, because most people don't know how taxes work, which is a massive failure in our education system, which is why we need higher taxes on the rich people. Because you don't pay, 30 to 40% of your whole income. You pay 30 to 40% of the income that goes over the threshold.
I want to say that threshold is £70,000, but I really can't remember entirely. But one of the major issues I have on the just slamming up taxes on the rich is you're scaring investment, you're scaring corporations, because at the end of the day, a lot of corporations are just their owners, and you're quite possibly damaging firms. The investment in the UK is at times pretty abysmal. Obviously, we have quite good tech investment at the moment. But I think the lowering of taxes on everyone will really allow the market to match itself, because at the moment, there's giant disparities in markets and reality. As you said, like, we have the fastest growing economy in the G7 on the second. That's really not what's going on. There's a giant disparity in the market because there's still huge amounts of poverty, and obviously I'm not a fan of the income, what do you call it, national insurance tax hike. But then you've got to think, why is it being done? Because you've got to think, why is that national insurance tax occurring? It's probably because we printed over £700 billion or £800 billion during the pandemic, and we need to start reining in the money back to pay off that debt. And I hate debt as a principle. But one of the major things with taxes is that you are creating that disparity and you're dissuading work. We see that with the I can't remember what the diagram's called, like percentage of people work based on percentage of the taxation. And what we're risking is dissuading people to work. And we've already just got a huge amount of people, we have the highest amount of people working in UK history. I think we jeopardize all of those people to working poverty unless we actually lower taxes. I want to raise personally, I don't think there should be an income tax, which I know is pretty radical, but at least slamming up the threshold for taxes, or the tax allowance, would definitely be amazing, because the disposable income increase and the increase in purchasing power priority of UK consumers would go through the roof, and that is crucial at the moment, especially with the working poverty, the relative poverty, and the small amount of absolute poverty in the UK. What is it, 22.5% working in relative poverty, something like that. Yeah, so
it's still ridiculously high.
It is still incredibly high. I couldn't agree more. But I don't think the way to fix that is welfare. I think the way to fix that is through allowing more free market economics in terms of lower taxation, and allowing the markets to match themselves.
I I mean, in principle, I agree, but the free market is never fair, and I'm for, you know, I want everyone to have an equal chance and everyone to be able to live a comfortable life over having a free market. So if there was a way that we could, have practically practical equality, not everyone has the same, but everyone at least is not poor, I mean, that's generally how I see socialism is, anybody can be rich, but nobody can be poor, is the ideal. And I mean, unless someone comes up with a better way of raising government revenue in order to pay for welfare, then yeah, I am for progressive taxation. And I'm not a Nobel Prize winning economist, so I don't have the maths knowledge, and I don't have the theory knowledge really to back up how to actually do that. But there are some very clever people out there who, like Keynes. He in Europe at least, invented interventionist economics, and it, after World War II, it worked. It gave us the NHS and the welfare state and housing for the soldiers who came back from the war. And in America, the New Deal sustained the American economy until it managed to recover in World War II. Government spending is important to prevent market failure. And when you get when everything is so laissez-faire all the time with no intervention, it just doesn't, there's no safety net. That's what the government should be in the economy, is the safety net. So, I mean, our welfare system is total garbage. It's too difficult to get. It encourages you to stay on benefits rather than getting off of them. There's, people are always worried about fraud and people abusing the benefit system, but that number is actually very low. And immigrants do not abuse the welfare system in the UK. It is a very, very small minority, and when they do, they're usually white families. So, I think it's just, I would rather know that everyone was happy and healthy rather than hoping that the free market was going to do it for me.
I mean, the issue is yeah, I do like Keynes, and a lot of his economic principles I support. But the issue is that everyone, as I said with other people, that caused a giant argument. Everyone ignores the first part of the second part of Keynes's ideas. There's the first half where spending the economy, government intervention, New Deal, build back better in the US, stuff like that. However, no one takes into account the second half, which is cut spending and pay off the debt you just took out. No one does that. And as in economics, we're doing market failure at the moment. And one of the issues that done in my research of the 2009 financial crisis, the EU debt crisis, I should say, is the fact that people just won't stop spending on welfare. It collapsed the Portuguese economy. It collapsed the Spanish economy, almost. It collapsed the Greek economy. It collapsed the Irish economy, and it partially collapsed the Italian economy. Obviously, the Icelandic banking crash had something to do with that debt crisis, obviously. But the reason everyone kept going into more and more sovereign debt is because they kept on spending in welfare. And I agree, welfare is crucial. Obviously, I don't want to see people going hungry, but then you got to think, am I about to bankrupt the country? If the country goes bankrupt, is everyone else about to go bankrupt? Because as you know, if the government goes bankrupt, if the treasury or the central bank goes bankrupt,
you're screwed.
You're screwed.
Failed state. Yay!
Yeah, pretty much. Like, you're Somalia levels of screwed at that point.
Yeah.
The thing is you have Greece, who, what was it, 2007, 2008, socialist.
Wasn't there debt to GDP ratio something like
It was at
213%
it
debt
was
over their GDP?
107% in the year 2000. There it was a drop to 103 something percent by 2005 because of cool austerity measures. I know I just did that to annoy you. But 2000, it was either 2005 or 2007 or 8 or something. Socialist government got elected, started slamming money at the economy and welfare and all these amazing things. The state went bankrupt and had to be bailed out 3 times, and then had to implement much harsher austerity than was occurring in the early 2000s. And the issue is once we get hooked on welfare, we can't get off of it because no politician ever wants to shoot themselves in the face by saying, I'm going to cut welfare.
You're going to say foot then, and you just
No, a few steps further. It's like the Greek debt crisis almost brought down everything, but.
And then Germany decided to be mean and say they had to pay reparations.
Yeah,
which was like, guys, Hitler.
Yeah, and then Troika bailed them out 3 times, which I like, and now 205% GDP to debt ratio now. Yeah, it's just it makes me very wary of spending on welfare. Yeah. Same thing happened in Portugal and Spain and Italy because I mainly blame that on Berlusconi because he was insane. Still is insane. I don't know how he's still running. He's still technically banned from Italian politics.
Oh my god! I'm pretty sure do you have to be? They had Mussolini,
and then Berlusconi was banned, and he's somehow running.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that's totally fair, and I understand that debt can cause like government side market failure, but you can also get market failure from the free market. I mean, you look at the 1929 Wall Street crash and the lead on into the Great Depression. That was caused by commercial banks' debt. They were lending money in amounts that they couldn't make back because consumers were taking out debt to buy speculate on the stock market, and that caused the Great Depression, which is one of the biggest economic depressions ever. And the same thing happened in the 2008 financial crash. And I mean, it seems to me in the developed, in scare quotes, world, market failure more often happens due to the financial sector, including banking and, specifically mortgages in 2008, getting in over their head and too big for their boots and deciding that they're going to try and make as much money as possible at the expense of the average consumer. That because we generally have pretty stable governments. You don't often get violent revolutionary overthrow of developed governments. I don't remember the last time here was probably the Civil War, which, lasted for about a few years before we decided we wanted the king back.
Arguably, Corbyn is going to completely overthrow the government. I'm going to,
Yeah, I know.
I'm pretty sure Corbyn's wanting to overthrow the government in this, right?
Well, I mean, I would probably stand with him.
Yeah.
I think even you would at this point.
That's coming from a conservative.
But you don't get violent overthrow of governments and the implementing of socialist or fascist regimes in developed countries so much. I mean, it still happens, and Western governments absolutely do still commit massive atrocities, like the American genocide of the Native Americans and the Canadians of their indigenous people. But in the developed world, you generally see market failure coming more from the market side than the government side, and it's always the government who has to bail them out. So I think if you try and bring the scales into balance, then A, you don't get so much market failure on the market side, and B, you don't have to go into so much debt to bail them out if it does fail.
I mean, when Iceland didn't bail out the banks, they crashed half the European economies.
Mm.
So, I mean, obviously, the 2008 financial crisis was completely caused by irresponsible banking, and I will never forgive anyone for that because that was ridiculous. And that's sadly one of the only bad things I can say about Reagan, which is, just already annoyed you again.
See, Reagan's economics is not why I hate him. I mean,
Yeah.
you're perfectly entitled to your Reaganomics.
Reagan, it is
But
cool.
he was just a terrible human being.
Yeah,
He was racist. He was homophobic. He was, every phobic you can think of. He was probably it.
Yeah, he was
Little
not
bit of
he was not
Not a
epic.
funky human.
No,
A little bit of an off-topic rant about Reagan, but
Yeah.
carry on.
It's always our arguments are either like Reagan or someone like that.
Or Thatcher. Reagan or Thatcher.
Or Thatcher, yeah. But Reaganomics does introduce an important look into economics, allowing these markets to grow, because let's look at poverty over the last few hundred years. I know it's a big stretch.
Yeah.
The thing is what lower taxation and freer markets and innovation, which is spurred on by low taxes, has caused is someone 500 years ago who was in poverty would essentially starve to death. Someone 200 years ago in poverty couldn't afford a house. Someone in poverty today can't afford a phone. It's relative because the markets have improved so much thanks to freer markets and innovation, which is only ever really accessible to lower tax nations, which is why we see Germany being like such a innovation hub. Well, France isn't, because France still has a quite socialist taxation system of huge taxes.
I mean, but France aren't collapsing.
I mean,
Apart from their election system,
Yeah.
where that one fascist got through to the round before they
Yeah.
elected the president of France.
Yeah, obviously they're not collapsing, and but you got to look, they are being dragged up quite a bit by the EU, and it's difficult to explain. But once you get these lower taxes, you get more innovation, you get more international investment because of the increased return. You get more businesses able to pay their workers more according to Kaizen theory, which, works, which is why...
E.g. see Toyota.
Yeah, Japan, quite low taxes, corporations, and they have these huge incentives.
Is that still because, though, I mean, Japan, they have huge manufacturing industries in tech and car manufacturing. They're still a secondary economy, right? So they're majority manufacturing over service industry. And I think that works to their advantage. And also the fact that for a solid 20 years after World War II, they didn't have to pay anything in defense because America promised to protect them from, Russia and China when that happened a few years later. So I think, it depends. Part of the reason why I think that our welfare system doesn't work.
Let's just move on to welfare. We've already talked about taxes.
Taxes. I mean, at some point we should talk about your fabulous funky plan to eliminate income tax.
I absolutely hate income tax so much. I really hate it.
I mean, if you could get it to work.
Yeah, if I could get it, that's the issue. It's actually trying to see if it works.
I mean, you need to get a proper computer model.
I need to get an actual economist, not just an insane college student.
Yeah.
That would probably help. But
yeah. I mean,
look,
it was definitely interesting.
But I think I gave our economic teacher a heart attack when I said I want the velocity of currency to be about triple what it should be. I think.
So the amount that the currency
the speed
moves around the economy,
it's meant to be 2. I want it at 6. I don't want income tax. I want a higher VAT by about 3 or 4% to maintain government revenue.
Yeah.
I want a lower corporation tax.
And then you tax the
speed
before the money gets.
Yeah. You scrap the financial year, and as long as there's no pandemic, it'll be fine.
Yeah. see. I mean, when it comes to taxation and welfare, if I could, I would, we just rub off the whole whiteboard and redo everything, completely restructure the economy to be less about, GDP and growth and stuff, and more about just sustainability. Because otherwise, the planet is going to die, and we're all going to die before we're 60.
Yeah, it is a depressing future, but
I also think that the current economic cycle we have of boom and recession, and bust, taxation should go in line with that. So when you have a boom, you tax people less, and the other way around actually. You tax people more, the rich people more, when there's a boom, because they're making more money anyway. And then you have, money to spend on welfare when it's necessary, and you reduce welfare during a boom as well, because more people will be working, more people will have more disposable income, etc., etc. And then when you have a bust, as you inevitably do, because that's just how economics works.
Yeah, you can't not have a boom and bust cycle.
It's much easier to control because you have a plan set out for increasing tax and decreasing tax, and increasing welfare and decreasing welfare in relation to what the economy is doing.
Well, I think it's going to sound odd. I think that recessions are built into economics. Essentially, there has to be recessions, and I know it doesn't sound very cool, but also I looked it up. It's 45% for over 150 grand in income. 45% tax rate.
Yeah, but that's only, so say, did you say 150?
Yeah.
So say you earn 155,000.
You're only paying that 5,000.
On that 5,000.
Yeah.
So that's like what? For 50% of 5,000 is 250.
Yeah. 2,500.
Yeah, 2,500, which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, but you got to think about the principle and who you're really badly annoying by doing that. But
yeah, but then
anyway,
I also
back
think
to
it gives undue power to rich people. Return the means of production.
But I think one of the what were we going? Hold on. So yeah, recessions are built into economics because once those wealthy investors who have built up capital, capital over the time of the boom can then invest, innovate. The reason the recessions are necessary is because once you come out of that recession, you have higher incomes than before. You have more new innovated production, manufacturing and products because of that recession, not because of the boom, because the boom doesn't necessarily promote as much innovation as a bust would, because they know once that economy starts growing again, their innovation is going to pay off massively, and that innovation is the stuff that gets you out of those crises. And like the innovation of cars can get the manufacturing industry production based manufacturing production, what do you call it, technology, capital intensive labor. That innovation is what gets you out of that recession, and without that recession you wouldn't have that innovation necessarily. But let's move on to the welfare state, because we've already been about half an hour. Do you want to go first, because I went first on taxes?
Sure. The welfare state is necessary. You say that like you don't agree with me. Because you do. So
I do agree with you partially.
Free healthcare is necessary. Free education is necessary. Supporting those who are unable to work, like the elderly and the disabled, is necessary. Those are the three basic principles of the welfare state, and they are necessary. Because anything that you cannot live without it killing you should be free, is my opinion. So I mean, I get the whole energy and water. Still mad at Thatcher for privatizing all of that stuff. But it's really important, because there are people who cannot work. That they just can't. for whether it be for physical or mental reasons, that you have to support those people, because they are still people. No matter what anyone thinks, they are still people, they are still human beings, and they still deserve to live free of humiliation in the fact that they cannot look after themselves. So the welfare state is absolutely necessary in supporting those people who are at the most disadvantaged. Employment benefit, employment on welfare is important, because especially if, when it comes to structural unemployment, because that's not something you can help. So the closing of the pit led to massive structural unemployment of miners. They need unemployment benefits because, not only is their job gone, but their whole industry is just gone. So it's absolutely essential that we do support those people who are, struggling. And it's just, and it has to be expensive, I mean, education should be like national defense. It should be hugely expensive for the government and absolutely free for the citizen, because education it's a merit good. It helps to level the playing field. If you have a good education, you have a much higher chance of going on to a high-skilled job, be it, labour, like being an engineer, or being a teacher, or an academic. Those are all high-skilled jobs, and having a good education is important to going on to do those things. And, without the NHS, I don't know if my mum would still be alive. So that's something that's very important to me, because, I mean, you look at the American healthcare system and you see the shambles that it is in and has been for decades, and you realise, wow, I'm really grateful for the NHS. I don't want to have to pay hundreds of pounds to go and see a doctor if I've got an ear infection or a sinus infection, etc. It's just... And like I said about schools, it should be expensive for the government and completely free for the citizen. I am not personally hugely against also having private sectors of those, because those can drive innovation as well as the government. And also, if you have the money, I don't really give a shit what you do with it.
That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah. As long as you're not hurting anybody, then I don't really care what you do with your money. And so welfare is also socialised housing. I watched...
You just made me sigh very, very badly there.
I did. I just watched a really good documentary the other day. Do you know who George Clark is?
I've heard of him, but
yeah, he's an architect and TV personality. And he did a really interesting documentary that I think you should watch about the state of British socialised housing and how much of a mess that it is. And so I'm not going to go into detail. I highly suggest you go and watch it. It's on all four.
Yeah, I will give it a look. Yeah. I don't take sponsors on my podcast, but I agree there are necessary sections of welfare, obviously. Disability benefits, obviously, if you can't work, obviously. I'm a Tory, but I do have a heart.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
You obviously got that from The Wizard of Oz, so...
I've never watched it. But anyway, let's stay on topic. So there are necessary sections of welfare, and there's reason to believe that the subsidies government has given to US healthcare has actually inflated its prices, because they know it's a third party who's going to pay the price, so they can slam up those prices. But let's not get into why the US healthcare is so expensive, because we'll be here for 45 hours. The NHS, yes, I do see as necessary, especially with the incomes in the UK and the disposable income currently, and the incredibly high taxes that we have. Free healthcare is absolutely necessary here. I do agree with that. Obviously, pharmaceutical industries are sometimes best left privatized. I agree with you there because of the innovation that it provides. Obviously, the government can forfeit that cost that those pharmaceuticals provide, but the government is also, as long as there's competition in that market between pharmaceuticals, the government will be fine. Unemployment benefits, I'm a bit more shaky on, and no, I'm not like one of those three teeth radicals who think, oh, they're lazy, they're not getting a job on purpose. It's not what I'm on about. But the labour shortage currently in the UK, caused by nothing else than Brexit, is really yeah, thanks, Boris. Has really drained our economy, and the push towards employment is a difficult one. Yeah, I will admit. But when you've still got a 4% unemployment rate of workable people who can work, so and you've got tens of thousands of jobs still free, you've got to look. We've got to have people working. It's paramount to any economy, the employment rate.
Yeah.
It is a difficult one. Education spending and NHS spending, obviously, I do think they should be well funded, but we've got to look at the root of crime first and the root of health problems first. We should be.
I mean, one of the massive roots of crime is a lack of decent housing and poverty. Like, if you look at it, it's just so high that a lot of homeless people turn to things like drug addiction and alcoholism because they're just they have nothing else. And that is it makes them a criminal, but it also makes the root of their criminality something that they don't always have control over.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's why I think there should be structural changes like micro homes and allowing post offices to be used as addresses for the homeless. That would be, a cracking idea. But there are issues because I was listening to, I can't remember who it was, but it's like we should be fixing the alcohol issue rather than spending more on the NHS to cure people with liver cancer due to alcoholism and stuff like that. We should be educating the public on healthier eating rather than hiring 500,000 extra doctors to deal with the eventual obesity crisis that we are in, and that will get significantly worse. We should be focusing on education. Yes, I agree. But I do have an issue with higher education spending because you've got to look at how are we using that education spending, not spending, but how are the students using that education spending? As you know, especially in secondary schools, primary schools, there's a massive amount of students who are just fatalist effect and self-fulfilling prophecy, giving up on education. So.
Well, I would
and the issue is we shouldn't be spending more money for kids who are never going to try an education. We should be stricter and enforcing more socialization and primary socialization to ensure that they understand the importance of their education. And when you have a teenager who chooses, because it's always a choice, chooses not to participate in education, chooses to skip class, chooses to not pay attention, not do their homework, why the hell should we spend more and more money putting the government deeper and deeper into debt just to try and rescue people who don't want to put the effort in?
Well, I think often that fatalist attitude comes from the fact that our planet is actively dying under our feet, and a lot of them don't believe that they're going to live to see full and happy lives and watch the planet die. And climate anxiety and depression is a very real thing, and there have been studies done on it. Which is why environmental activism is so important. But that's besides the point. I kind of agree with you in the fact that kids who choose to not participate in their education are an issue. And I do also agree with you that their formative years should be spent instilling in them the importance of education, which is why I think we should scrap SATs because they're pointless. And primary school should be less about, why the hell do we have standardized tests at 11? It's just gross.
Well, my mum works at a primary school, and I think it's mainly to ensure that these students don't require extra help at secondary school, do or don't require extra help in terms of spelling, maths, stuff like that, because if they don't get the fundamentals of mathematics and English, which are, shown in SATs, then they're not going to get anywhere in secondary. So I think SATs are largely just a thing saying, does the student need extra help? Do they possibly have dyslexia? Stuff like that. So do we need to, I do support SATs because it gives us a good idea of the mental capability at a young age to see if they need that extra support to ensure a meritocratic education system.
I agree that it's really important to establish whether or not a child has special educational needs, but I think there are better ways of doing it than SATs. I'm not sure what they are, but I'm sure I can find out. And I agree that, it seems like it's always seemed unfair to me that, I put the huge amount of effort into my secondary school education. And I am not naturally the smartest person on the planet, but I try hard and my brain holds information I'm interested in, like, a sponge. But there are always those kids who just don't care, and it does frustrate me because they always get more attention from the teacher because the teacher's always, every 2 minutes telling them to shut up. Not in those specific words, they probably get fired.
Believe me, they don't.
No, I know. But it is massively important education spending, because, like you said, meritocratic education system is one of the most vital things to having a meritocratic society. And at the moment, we don't live in a meritocratic society. We live in a, society of cronyism. You go to a private school, you go to Oxford or Cambridge, you get into government, and then you can just work on building your own best interests. And this is why I could never be a Tory, because none of them, apart from like you, actually have the best interest of the nation at heart. They're all about themselves and their friends, as you can see by Boris Johnson. And also, supposedly going to the two best and oldest universities in the country makes you really smart. But as we can see, the best rebuttal that Boris Johnson could come up with to Keir Starmer's speech is to blame him for Jimmy Savile.
Yeah,
which he has not yet apologised for.
No, he tried to deflect in a recent interview. But back to the economic side, the welfare discourages work at times for a very small amount of people. I'm not one of those, radicals just sucking off the welfare state.
You're
no.
not,
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah.
Make the UK great.
Oh, don't. That's cursed. But the economic side of it, the one issue I have with welfare is that you're increasing the demand in the economy without increasing the
supply.
The production capability and the production capacity.
Yeah.
You're making the general populace poorer to help those at the bottom. Obviously, I do want to help those at the bottom, but you are making the general population poorer because of you're only increasing demand and not supply. And then because of that, more people are going to need to be on welfare. And it just keeps making itself worse, which is one major issue I have with welfare. And another one is, obviously, as we talked about, debt. As a principal, I hate debt. As an economist, I hate debt. Well, I'm not an economist, but, studying economics. A student of economics, I hate debt. And it's shown time and time again that just slamming money at things doesn't work. Especially in the long time. If you look at China now, government investment, they basically had a New Deal, but 10 times the size in China, and now they're because it's unprofitable for these independent and state-controlled firms, their finances are collapsing, their housing market is collapsing, everything is collapsing. Just because you build more social houses doesn't mean the price of houses will go down. That's not how it works.
No.
If the government spends £10 billion on more social housing, you're only going to increase the high price of houses, because you're creating demand pull inflation. You're creating more renting, which is actually more expensive especially for people working class, renting rather than mortgage. And the real only way to do it is cut the taxes for housing companies, deregulate the housing market. And I'm not about like the structural integrity of houses, obviously. I don't want houses toppling on
Just
people.
fall down.
Yeah, I'm
We
talking
don't
about.
want another Grenfell Tower.
Yeah, we really don't. And obviously safety. I mean, I don't like regulation, but the only three regulations I care about is workers' rights in terms of minimum wage and holiday, environmental, and safety. So those are the only three regulations that I think should be, possibly even expanded on.
I like globalization as a concept, and that's often, in favor of deregulation of the markets. And I agree with you on those 3 points, that those are the three most important.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we need is to deregulate planning permissions, have it like a German style. Need to drop this case by case basis. It's awful, especially since Jeremy Clarkson's restaurant got denied by the council. that is literally like the breaking point of me. We need to get rid of the case by case basis.
I don't really care, because I think Jeremy Clarkson is a terrible person.
But you see what I mean? Like, we can't have a council deciding whether or not someone can, build on their private property. It's ridiculous. You bought that property, and that's why the housing market is so expensive.
No, I agree.
Is because you get a firm that doesn't actually build houses. They go out and buy a field for £1 million.
Yeah.
They then go to council, can we build on it? If they say yes, they sell that field for £10 million because they got the planning permission.
Yeah.
So it's the regulation and the welfare state of social housing that has really increased the price.
I don't think social housing has not much to do with the price of houses, because there are ways to do it that mean that it doesn't. There are ways to fix it. The Austrian social housing is phenomenal. Their social housing system is absolutely bonkers, and it works. And I think social housing doesn't necessarily have to drive up the price of housing, because it's owned by the government. Suspend right to buy. And no, but I do agree with you on the fact that planning permission, because it affects not just these massive companies, which then have a huge boost in their profit, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a little excessive, which makes house prices more expensive. It also affects the average people who want to build an extension to make their house more livable, because if you can't get planning permission, then you're stuck in a tiny box.
I completely agree with right to buy. I think it is very, very necessary. Also provided a huge boost in government revenue, which ace.
Also, this is kind of off topic, but right to buy was absolutely a political scheme, because when you think about landowners and private property owners, you think Tory, right? Historically, the people who have been Tories have been people who owned property, like the upper classes. And so owning a house then sees you associated with those upper classes, which makes you more likely to vote Tory. So I think it was a political decision on the part of the Thatcher government to institute right to buy, because you think property owning, even if it's literally just your council house that you bought, you think Tory, which massively increases their voter base.
Yeah, but you got to think renting what £800-900 a month, mortgages 600-700.
Yeah, no, I
It is
understand that fact,
the right
but
to buy did improve the living standards of and the disposable income of a lot of British consumers. The issue is you can't have government housing without increasing the price of houses. Not only are you buying more materials, which increases demand pull inflation,
yeah,
but you're also causing a lower demand for private housing. And we all know what happens when there's a low demand, there's a high price.
yeah,
And the issue is that, coupled with the regulation on housing building, means the market cannot find equilibrium because the demand is permanently stuck so high, and yet the demand is yet still so low somehow,
yeah.
because there's such a low demand because no one can afford it. Yeah, there's such a high demand because everyone needs a house.
Needs a house. Yeah.
Yeah, so building social houses will increase supply, but will not only increase the price. Realistically,
I mean, yes, there are ways around it. I don't know them because I'm not a qualified econ. What was I saying? But socialized housing, it doesn't have to. I mean, there must be a way around it. I'm not a fully qualified economist, so I haven't got the capacity to run like models and stuff of how an increased stock of socialized housing will increase the housing market. But I think it's just so important because there are so many people who are living in really terrible conditions because of temporary housing accommodation. And it ends up not being temporary. And it's a huge disadvantage to people. So I agree with you on the fact that, education, health, and supporting those who cannot work are the three pillars of the welfare state, and the environmentalism, workers' rights, and safety regulations are the most important regulations in the industry.
yeah. So not so much the unemployment subsidies for me, but the healthcare and education are still very important.
Yeah. But I think when it comes to driving house prices up, we need regulations on renting, because landlords are not massive regulations, but just to make it affordable.
Yeah, but then you are trying to shift market forces, and if landlords see a decline in profits, they're going to be buying less property to make available. Because why one? If you're a landlord, you're going to say, okay, they've capped my profit, I'm making a loss, I'm going to kick everyone out, sell the house at an inflated price to make back what I've lost. Like, the rent caps work at times. Obviously, with COVID, it was absolutely necessary to have rent freezes and eviction freezes, but it really does affect the market quite badly when you place rent caps in normal times.
But I do mean in the way that, like, there just has to be some way to control rent, not necessarily rent controls, but like subsidies for those who can't afford their rents going straight to the landlord, because humans are irrational beings, no matter what classical economics tells you. There has to be some way to make both housing and also renting more affordable, because it's one of the pillars of the welfare state, and it has been since it was created in 1945.
Yeah. And I'd like to thank you for joining us. Thank you, Abu.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll hope to see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye.